You can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. To hear the latest episode, just say, "Play the news from The Australian."
From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Clare Harvey. It's Monday, July 29. Nursing homes have lost $5 billion in the past 5 years, and 3/4 of them face sustained losses without a new funding model. That story is live now for our subscribers at theaustralian.com.au. Immigration Minister Andrew Giles is out, and so is Home Affairs Minister Clare O'Neill, as Anthony Albanese tries to regain control of border policy. Plus, a new Indigenous Affairs Minister rises. Today, Anthony Albanese's big cabinet reshuffle and what it tells us about the looming election.
Anthony Albanese has put his government on an election footing by removing 2 underperforming ministers while putting one of his most senior lieutenants into the key Home Affairs ministry.
In federal politics, some portfolios are much tougher than others. Immigration, you need nerves of steel and the ability to sail past allegations of heartlessness. You're in charge of the overall migration mix, deportations and offshore detention. What could go wrong, right? Home Affairs, you carry the can for border protection, counter-terrorism and cybersecurity. When a boat full of Sri Lankan or Pakistani asylum seekers lands in remote WA, you get the call. When Anthony Albanese came to government in 2022, he chose 2 newbie ministers. Immigration went to a member of the PM's own left faction, Andrew Giles, a lawyer, and Home Affairs to a member of Labor's right, former Victorian local mayor and management consultant Clare O'Neill. They have struggled, not necessarily because of personal failings, but because these are hugely challenging jobs for first-time ministers or anyone. Now, both their jobs have been handed to one of the most powerful people in government, Tony Burke, from Labor's famously ruthless New South Wales right faction. Burke takes pretty much all their responsibilities, except ASIO, the nation's spy agency. That's moved out of Home Affairs and into the Attorney General's Department. Greg Brown is the Australian's Canberra Bureau Chief.
Tony Burke will be the Minister for both Home Affairs and Immigration, so he's doing 2 former ministers' jobs in one. He's also looking after multicultural affairs, which I think is critical given he's a Western Sydney MP with a high Muslim population. He's also the Minister for the Arts. He's also the Minister for Cybersecurity, which comes under Home Affairs. And he's also the Leader of the House, which is kind of like the government's key strategist. Now, I think a key takeout from this is that this is the appointment that Anthony Albanese made 2 years too late. Upon coming into government, he should have treated Home Affairs and immigration seriously. Instead, he knew no one wanted to do either. It's always poison for an ambitious Labor politician to take those portfolios. So he put in Clare O'Neill, someone who he, I don't think, has a particularly close relationship with. He put her into Home Affairs, and then he put his very good mate, Andrew Giles, into immigration because he knew that Giles, being very loyal to him, wouldn't say no and wouldn't be angry with him about it.
Taking Burke's previous job is another winner from the reshuffle, the left faction's Murray Watt. He's the widely respected Minister for Agriculture, who's been promoted to Employment and Workplace Relations, a big cabinet job.
It's a big promotion for Murray Watt. He's one of the key figures of the Queensland left, and he's got a lot of union backing, factional backing, but he's also a very good performer. So I think this is Albanese shoring up some of his internal support by people that are close from the United Workers Union, a key union, but also rewarding Senator Watt for his very good performances. In doing so, though, it does risk putting regional Australia offside And that is really something that Labor traditionally struggles with.
Andrew Giles has been dealing with a nightmarish unintended consequence of a Labor policy. Labor inherited from the coalition a tough regime of deporting convicted criminals who are non-citizens of Australia. But early in its term, Labor decided to introduce a new rule called Direction 99, which allowed the tribunal that rules on these cases to consider the length and depth of a criminal's connection to Australia when deciding whether to let them stay. Surprise, surprise, this led to hardcore convicts whom the government wanted to deport being allowed to remain in Australia. The government had to frantically dump that policy. Clare O'Neill's tenure, and remember she was in charge of Border Force, has seen an uptick in what the government calls unauthorised maritime arrivals, boat people. More than 350 potential irregular immigrants, that's another government euphemism, have arrived, and all have been either turned back to their country of departure or taken to the processing centre on Nauru. Last month, 12 people were turned back, 37 went to Nauru, 5 went home from Nauru to their own countries, and 5 voluntarily left Australia. So it's a trickle, not the kind of flood the opposition predicted when Labor came to power. Here's O'Neill in April.
Operation Sovereign Borders is a sacrosanct part of Australian public policy. It's something that I spend a lot of time on. It's something that we've devoted additional resources to. I've been a bit disappointed in recent days to see people that I actually respect in the opposition coming out and, telling untruths about this and calling into question aspects of this policy. The commander of Operation Sovereign Borders has been really open. That provides an alternative narrative for people smugglers, and I ask them to stop doing it.
So we're talking about a few hundred asylum seekers, not tens of thousands. So why is Clare O'Neill facing the chop?
I think she's very much seen as part of the problem with, while it may have been delegated to Andrew Giles, the fact is she was the senior minister in those portfolios. She should have been ensuring some of those mistakes weren't made. She should have been asking more questions of her junior minister about Direction 99. Quite frankly, I think that she's got off pretty lightly with public criticism because so much of it was borne by Andrew Giles.
O'Neill and Giles were jointly assigned to handle another migration headache, a High Court decision to release scores of stateless detainees. The High Court ruled they couldn't be held in custody indefinitely. Some had been convicted of serious crimes. Since their release, some have allegedly committed more violent offences. But Greg, to listen to Anthony Albanese, you'd think immigration and border protection was not the dumpster fire it seems to be.
Then why did you move Andrew Giles from the portfolio?
Because there's a reshuffle. What you do when there's a reshuffle is that there is a change that then has a knock-on effect.
In fact, the PM sounded pretty defensive in his Sunday press conference.
We have been the most experienced incoming Labor government in history. We are considered, things are orderly, policy processes are right.
Well, I think it was a bit of a bizarre explanation. I agree with you, Claire, because you think if you're moving on ministers in high-profile portfolios where there are a lot of problems, he's moving them on and then saying, oh, but they didn't do anything wrong, they did a great job. So there's actually no explanation to the electorate as to why it's happening. So it doesn't seem to pass the pub test, really. I think nearly all of it is HR. I think the retirement of a couple of ministers gave him the opportunity to make a couple of these key changes, and I think it's more about the sales pitch than the policy.
Both O'Neill and Giles have been reappointed to new jobs. Giles will take on skills and training, and that portfolio has been dumped from Cabinet. So he'll be in the outer ministry. Ouch. In Clare O'Neill's case, it's homelessness and housing. She remains in Cabinet, but it's a much less important role.
They did need more energy in housing, I think. They're facing a lot of pressure from both the Coalition and the Greens on that portfolio. So I think they're hoping it will be more within, it does suit her more.
Coming up, after the break, a new Minister in Indigenous Affairs to take on Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. The Australian has all the best political commentary, bar none. You can read our experts' analysis of all this, plus be the first to know about everything else by joining our subscribers at theaustralian.com.au. We'll be back after the break. Mullindiri McCarthy is a Yanyuwa woman and former journalist, born in Katherine in the Northern Territory. She's been a Territory MP and, since 2016, a Senator. She's a passionate advocate and has spoken of how John Howard's emergency intervention in remote communities, sparked by reports of rampant child sex offending and substance abuse, left her deeply saddened. Now she's Minister for Indigenous Australians, taking the portfolio from Linda Burney, who's retiring.
It's extremely tough after the mishandling of that voice referendum.
The 2023 referendum defeat. Australians voted no to enshrining an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice in the Constitution, left Labor promising to forge a new path ahead towards reconciliation. But it's been light on detail so far.
Senator McCarthy, I think, will be in a very tough spot because you'll have the Indigenous leadership pushing for new architecture, things like a legislated voice, which could have been done without a referendum already, things like a Makarrata Commission, making movements on not just truth-telling but treaty. However, I think there's such little appetite to go down this path within the government at the moment that I don't think she'll be given a whole lot of leeway from the Prime Minister to do things other than the sort of old-fashioned things that governments have done with Indigenous affairs, which is the practical stuff, education, crime, and these sorts of things. I'd be pretty staggered if she oversaw an ambitious new architecture for Indigenous Australians, but that is going to be, I think, a key point of tension between her and the Prime Minister.
Greg Brown is The Australian's